Chen Yinglong was no longer practicing at the hospital, but his student was, and his student was Dr. Shi. And so this guy wrote me a letter, wrote me a little note of introduction to Dr. Shi. And so once I got settled in Xiamen, first thing I did was go over to the hospital and see if I could internship with Dr. Shi. And he was excited about it, but they had to get permission from Beijing. So that took a little while, and they didn't know what to charge me or how to do anything at all. And in those days, this is a long time ago, so they had separate foreigner money. And there was foreigner money and there was Chinese people money.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. You hear about the mind-body connection. Have you noticed that patients, new patients in particular, are often in the process of what I'm going to call talking themselves into acupuncture? They come in and say things like, it's been around for thousands of years, so there must be something to it. Or, I believe in the mind-body connection. I like that one. The mind-body connection. I've been a fan of it too. It sounded right when I first heard it. Seemed to give a kind of escape route from the reductionist tyranny of biology. But as time's gone on, I found that phrase to be a bit sterile. Like there's a map, much like you'd see when you pull up a Google map. It shows you the route that you want, but it leaves out the topography. Low-lying areas of stagnant water where there are trees, layers of wild cats, and the shortcut routes that kids cut through unfenced yards. I've come to consider it more like a mind-body entanglement, like the way tree roots entangle with the soil, bugs, snakes, and burrowing critters. Entanglement, like how knowledge and uncertainty dance together, or the way that ideas, half fully thought, entangle with faith, belief, or desire. Look at an acupuncture chart, and much like that Google map, you'll see the simplified version of the Jingmai. But in reality, the channels are entangled watershed-like entities, and when you zoom out, there are delineations between Yang Ming and Xiaoyang. But as you look closer, you'll fail to find a clear border. Mind-body entanglement is more descriptive of the confused jumble our patients bring to us. As much as I'd love to have a single, clear, definitive diagnosis, in reality, I'm only capable of catching a particular dynamic at a moment in time and space. Often enough, it allows to be helpful in that moment, but the river keeps flowing, and sometimes, if your treatment has been skilled and accurate, it's flowing differently. Good acupuncture creates a bifurcation point that does set people off on a different trajectory. It's satisfying work. I rather enjoy meeting people along their journey for a few treatments and then step aside so they can get on with their life. I suspect the best treatments are those that in short order the patient forgets, as they're simply involved with living their life with ease and capacity. But often enough, as we are entangled beings, it's not just mind-body, but individual collective. And then there are the stories of identity that we ceaselessly whisper to ourselves. And so there are the entanglements of acceptance, identity, loyalty, and belonging. It's difficult to see our entanglements. There are the water in which we swim, the beliefs, preferences, opinions, hopes, and hates that create a solid sense of separate being. Our physiology and psychology, completely intermingled. Our history, family, and culture, unavoidable. I find it helpful to consider entanglement because it reminds me of the chaotic noodle soup that is a human life. It's not necessarily something to be unraveled, but rather explored. Some people have a knack for pulling on some thread of interest to see where it goes, and then where that goes, and then to see what comes after that. Andy Ellis is one of those kinds of people. He's inquisitive and with an openness to seeing how an idea or opportunity just might pan out. Some people want to be sure that there's some kind of payoff for their efforts. Andy? He seems to come down more on the side of, I wonder what's up beyond that bend in the road. That inquisitiveness, it took him into the Chinese language in Taiwan, which in turn opened up unique opportunities to continue his study of acupuncture and herbal medicine, and eventually over to shaman on the mainland, and then increasingly into the world of Chinese herbs. If you've been in the trade for any amount of time, you've probably read a book or three that's available because of his efforts. We're going to get into all of this and more in a moment. Stay with us. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AcuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Welcome to Shop Talk. In this portion of the podcast, we are bringing you roughly 15 minutes of practical, clinical methods, perspectives, and advice that has its work boots on. This section is all about practical material that you can begin to investigate the next time that you walk into clinic. Additionally, visit the show notes page for supporting materials from this week's guest on Shop Talk. All right, roll up your sleeves. Let's get to work.
Settle in for this shop talk and get ready for some serious ghostly fun. Today, I'm about to float and glide into the wonderfully enigmatic world of the 13 ghost points, an esoteric treatment I've been using in my practice for nearly 2 decades, and it's the subject of an upcoming book that we are writing on the 13 ghost points. I believe the ghost points, they're like the hidden gems in the acupuncture world. And, they've been taught almost like a sidebar in acupuncture schools, shrouded in mystery and just simply misunderstood. I have embraced the power of the ghost points through the understanding that it really demands a certain level of practitioner self-cultivation before their potency can be fully realized. Today, I'm hoping to shed some light on how I use these and teach them, and how you can begin to cultivate a deeper understanding of these points and maybe even harness them for their transformative power in your own life and practice. I'm Lita Herman, the co-founder of the Alchemy Learning Center and the Alchemy Healing Center. The Alchemy Learning Center is a growing community of acupuncturists, healers, and self-cultivators from all over the world. Together, we're exploring Taoist alchemy and classical Chinese medicine as a means to unlocking our true potential and helping others to do the same. In this Shop Talk episode, I will show you how the ghost points can be an integral part of our alchemical Chinese medicine approach. Let's go back in time. The origins of the ghost points trace back to the earliest known Chinese physician, Yuan Fen, who actually created 20 ghost points. However, the most renowned set that we know about today is the 13 ghost points, and they were assembled into a protocol by the king of medicine, Sun Miao, who was born in 581 of the Common Era. Originally designed to cast out demons, these points are much more relevant in our modern-day practices than you might think. I once believed the ghost points, they should be reserved for the most dire cases as a last resort. However, when I incorporated the ghost points into my practice, something really fascinating began to occur. The family members of the clients who had these treatments done witnessed profound shifts in their loved ones, and then they began wanting to have their own ghost point treatments done. They too carried traumas from their past, even if their symptoms were less pronounced. Many people have their own hidden baggage, or what I call skeletons in closets, even if they're not possessed by ghosts or gwei in the traditional sense. I often say they're haunted by their past, and it's like they're a fish on a hook. As hard as they try to wriggle off those hooks, it's incredibly hard to actually break free. In today's modern landscape, I find that so many of my clients can benefit from the ghost points, and so many people from around the world have come to receive the treatment and study and learn more about the ghost points in their lives and in their practice. Why, you might be asking yourself? Because these points act as liberators, unshackling the chains of trauma and clearing the old baggage of this lifetime that's been cluttering up your life. Another way to look at these points is that they can help break up stuck cellular patterns on the physical level and let go of obsessive thought patterns on the mental level. Consequently, I now incorporate ghost points for anyone who has faced trauma or adversity, which includes nearly everyone, except maybe those fortunate individuals with idyllic childhoods. Although, even in the best of circumstances, life can still present challenges in the person's mind. So the question is, are the ghost points appropriate for you to use in a daily setting, say during a 1-hour acupuncture session? While I generally adhere to the original Sun Si Miao point prescription as an almost ritualistic all-day protocol, I understand that treating a single client for up to 4 to 6 hours may sound a bit extreme to some practitioners. However, I have used it as a highly effective approach to cleansing accumulated baggage, which quite frankly takes time. You can't expect a patient to release something carried for their entire lifetime within the traditional 1-hour setting format. However, if you're eager to embrace the ghost points, I suggest starting with a more accessible entry point. Given the significant self-cultivation you're going to need, I'm going to recommend today that you start by using the ghost points as single points. That being said, I'm going to recommend the points that are less activating or destabilizing for the majority of patients. This way, you can integrate them into a conventional 1-hour session and potentially work up to offering longer treatments over time. One of the reasons we do the longer sessions is that the ghost points can potentially open a Pandora's box of trauma and emotions for some clients. Once that box is cracked open even a little, you can't easily deal with all that comes out within an hour. It wouldn't be fair to end the session with everything heightened and activated, leaving the patient in a somewhat unstable state. For this reason, I advise caution using the ghost points, being fully aware of what you're asking that person to do during this work. That said, a few ghost points appear to be less triggering overall and align well with shorter sessions. After years of practice with hundreds of clients, I have found that these points seem to impart wisdom, gradually unveiling their true essence to me. With time, you'll begin to decode them, and their impact on your patients becomes more evident. For our purposes today, I'm going to recommend 2 points. First, let's look at Ghost Palace, or Do 26, the initial point in the 13 ghost point sequence. I like to call this point the door to your palace, and the Chinese character used for this point is a large entryway where the palace guests are greeted, much like the door to a majestic hall. This point is located between the mouth and the nose, the most accessible entry points of the body. It's like your interface to the world. You breathe and eat and take in the world through this area. So the question is, what does this door represent for the patient, especially after trauma or negative life events? Was it once wide open, but now is bolted shut with only a peephole? Some people are naturally open and gregarious, and some people naturally have a closed door. But trauma can really affect how a person relates to the world, so this point is an ideal starting place. It's about the outermost public-facing part of you, so it doesn't tend to unearth those deep secrets like the ghost hidden point, which is traditionally Ren 1 for men. Ghost Palace helps to restore a person's authentic interaction with the world. Another beneficial point, which seems to avoid being triggering, is Ghost Market, or Ren 24. I actually think we all need this point because we often struggle to put ourselves out in the world as healers. Ghost Market is about how we express ourselves in the world. Do we speak highly of ourselves or persistently undermine our worth? This point encapsulates the belief that each of us possesses a gift, a role to play in the world. We are cogs in the wheel, and when we withhold our gifts, the designated recipients of our gifts suffer, and the wheel doesn't turn. In other words, people out there need your unique gifts, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they receive the signals that indicate that we are offering something they may want and need. Imagine you're selling apples at a farmer's market. What would you write on your booth sign that's both honest and enticing enough for the person needing your apples to say, yes, that's what I want? Even if your apples are some of the tastiest out there, but have the occasional worm in them, there will be someone out there who values the taste over the occasional imperfection and absolutely love your apples. So when you work with REN 24, it seems to be a point that can profoundly benefit patients without triggering overwhelming reactions. Although you may not be able to unlock its full potential without doing the preceding points in the protocol, the results of doing the single point can still be astonishing. I once did this point in an expo in a brief 20-minute treatment at my booth. A year later, the woman returned, recounting a life-transforming experience. She believed the treatment changed her entire life, and she now had everything she wanted. She felt like the point dissolved some kind of barrier that had hindered her progress in the past. It enabled her to speak her truth and chase after what she truly wanted in her life, moving across the country, finding her romantic partner, and having the career she always dreamed of, all from one ghost point. Now, the method for working with ghost points that I use in my clinic and teach is quite unique. It's traditionally done with a vibrating technique. In our program, we teach students a non-needle vibrational technique where your finger takes the place of the needle and the energetic vibration occurs beneath the skin. It's a very powerful approach. If you choose to use a needle, you'll need to experiment with the vibrational technique that suits you best. Some practitioners insert the needle and then gently vibrate it, while others use a Toya Hari-like technique with the needle hovering over the skin's surface and vibrating until once the point feels open and complete, then they insert the needle and retain it for a period of time. Traditionally, all the needles in the 13 Ghost Points protocol are retained and removed in reverse order. Regardless of your preference for needles or our non-needle technique, the crucial factor is to proceed patiently, allowing whatever needs to surface to manifest for the client. An essential aspect of mastering the ghost points involves knowing when to insert yourself into the treatment and when to remain an observant guide. It's equally vital to stay in the room with the person even after the needles are inserted, as they might need time to process the experience with your presence. I've encountered patients who have told stories of undergoing ghost point sessions with other practitioners who left them alone in the room, an emotionally unsettling experience. Alchemy and alchemical treatments center around facilitation, not fixing the client or healing the client. It's about walking alongside your client temporarily, bearing witness to any shifts that transpire. This is what I believe is the truest form and power of this incredible work. So to summarize, the ghost points hold tremendous power, yet cultivating their potential takes time and dedication. As a starting place, I recommend selecting 1 or 2 ghost points for initial cultivation. Ghost Palace, Dew 26, is an excellent starting point for clients struggling to authentically express themselves in the world, while Ghost Market, REN 24, is a great choice for those who struggle with positive self-expression. Utilizing a vibrating technique, either with the needle inserted, hovering over the point, or by exploring our non-needle technique, which I personally feel is even more powerful, but that is just how I practice and teach. If you're interested in discovering more in the realm of alchemical work, we have a number of online CEU classes on our alchemylearningcenter.com. Additionally, a new alchemy apprenticeship group will start this fall, designed to focus and guide your path and make this work more accessible and effective. Our goal is to facilitate deep connection with the ghost points within yourself, enabling you to utilize the transformative power in your own life and then eventually in your clinic. We also invite you to explore our podcast, the Inspired Action Podcast, dedicated to conversations about alchemy, the 5 elements, and the 9 palaces. I hope you enjoyed this shop talk on the potential of the ghost points. Thank you for joining me on this transformative exploration of alchemical healing, and keep an eye out for our new book on the 13 ghost points entitled The 13 Ghost Points, Clearing and Transcending Life's Traumas, due out in the first part of 2024.
Andy Ellis, welcome back to Geological.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
Always fun to hang out with you. Never know what's going to happen.
That's true. That's true. Usually it's dumplings.
Dumplings is a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I don't think it's ever a bad idea, is it?
Well, there may be times, but that'll be a topic for a different show, I think.
It would be. So today we're here because it's the Chinese Medicine History Channel.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah. You know, in our trade, we really like to trace our history back like thousands and thousands of years. But something I've gotten really curious about is like how Chinese medicine landed in the States, especially like in the Western community, back when it kind of started up. You know, if you go back to the 50s, there's no like regular white Americans practicing acupuncture, I don't think. This stuff started up. When did it start up? I mean, you've been here since kind of the beginning, and I'm really curious to know, what was it like in the beginning? I mean, what were you doing back at the time when you first heard about acupuncture? What was going on in your world?
Well, I was in my 20s, and I was teaching special education. That was what I was doing for a living, at least. And so those were the old hippie days. And so we're talking about 1970s, 1975, 76. So probably heard about acupuncture. Maybe I forget when that guy went to when the guy went to China.
Yeah, the Nixon guy.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember hearing about that when it happened, but it didn't really have a big impact on me. It wasn't anything I was thinking about. But after teaching special education for about 12 years, I realized that I was going to have to do something different eventually. That it was too exhausting. It was very tiring work. And so I started to look around. And there was the acupuncture school in Boston had opened up, Dr. So. And so I looked into it, you know.
But why acupuncture? I mean, what was it that was going on in your life besides, I think I need a new career? I get that. A lot of us have been there. But why acupuncture? I mean, what was it that caught your attention? And I mean, what problem was it going to solve for you besides maybe I can make a living?
Gosh, I don't think making a living was high on the list. You know, I was single, and you don't need a lot of money when you're single. So that was not, if that was the motivation, I think I would have chosen a different field. No, you know, I was in the helping professions. I taught special education, and I had done that for a long time. And I realized what that did for my soul, not for my pocketbook. And so I wanted something similar to that, to help people. And so, you know, that was what, it seemed like a cool thing. I have to admit, you know, when you're in your 20s, you're kind of looking for something that's cool. You know, if you meet a girl and you want to, because this was girls, so I was in my 20s. Yeah, maybe they were young women. If you meet a young woman at that time, then, you know, you want to say, what are you doing? And if you're, you know, selling stocks or something, I guess that didn't seem so cool. So I think I wanted to be cool. But after I got into it, of course, all that faded away. It was a lot of work to learn Chinese medicine.
So wait a minute. You went into acupuncture so you could look good for girls?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure that was a factor.
It looks good on my business card, but I don't have any business cards because I'm kind of a hippie.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, to be honest, I think that was, you know, it was a cool thing. It was a nice thing to do. And it was the same as teaching in terms of, you know, it was the helping profession.
Yeah. Another way to help folks.
And then, you know, things got a little out of hand. I thought I was just going to acupuncture school. And I went to the New England School of Acupuncture, and Dr. So was there, but he had just, he was having some health issues at the time. And he quit probably about a year into my stay at the New England School of Acupuncture. So I decided I would quit as well. And I asked him, you know, what next? And he said, well, go to Taiwan. So somebody probably said that to you at some point, Michael.
I've heard that. I have heard that, yes.
And so he arranged, you know, for me to study with he had a friend who was also from the Chengdanan school, which is the school that he had, the school of acupuncture that he had studied with. And he introduced me to him, and I went to Taiwan. I had a friend who bought me an airplane ticket. Of course, I had no money. And I got to Taiwan and knew very little Chinese. I had studied a little bit of Chinese, you know, on my own. I took I audited a class at Smith College, and then and started to translate Chinese medicine books. That was back in, you know, we're talking about 1980.
1980. Okay, so Let's rewind this for just a second. I keep hearing about this Dr. So character. I don't know Dr. So. But I hear a lot of folks, like back from the early days, they say, well, of course, Dr. So. So who is this Dr. So?
Yeah, his name is Su Tian something. I can't remember. But they called him James. It was his first name. I guess in Cantonese, Su comes out as So. So he was Dr. So, Dr. James Tin Yin. So Tian Yin, maybe? Tian Yin So. In any case, he was the only teacher pretty much at the acupuncture school in the New England School of Acupuncture. And he was a pretty typical, what turned out to be, I didn't know it at the time, but typical, his teaching methods were typically Chinese, where he would just go up there and give his lecture, and if you didn't get it, then you were stupid, and you should go back and read his book again. Yeah. So, but he was a great guy, actually, as it turned out. And, but, in China, that's the way the respect you give to the teacher is just, that's the way you do it,
Right. Teacher says it, you learned it. What do you mean you didn't learn it? The teacher said it. How could you have missed it?
You weren't listening.
You weren't listening.
So, but he was great. And I adapted fairly quickly to that method of learning. And I spent a lot of time, because I was learning Chinese at the time, I wanted to know all the names of the acupuncture points. So grasping the wind actually stemmed from that, because Dr. So emphasized that the names were important, that those numbers were kind of meaningless, and that it was important to learn the names. So I started studying the names and trying to figure out why they were called what they were called.
Now, yeah, you were like the first guy to do the names of the points, really, in English.
Yeah, there was very little stuff even in Chinese at that time about the names of the acupuncture points. There weren't a lot of Chinese medicine books in general. It's not like...
No, there weren't.
Yeah, in those days. I'm talking about in Chinese even. Yeah, and so to find out stuff like that was difficult.
I want to get into that in just a second. You went to New England school, but did you graduate from there? Or no, you went until Dr. So went, and then you were gone.
Yeah, because, what was left after that, I'm sure they were very good teachers, but that wasn't what I wanted. I really wanted it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Why did he say go to Taiwan?
Well, you couldn't go to mainland China in those days because it was a communist country and they didn't let you in. So the only option, I suppose you could have gone to Singapore or something like that, but he knew this guy in Taiwan. And so he suggested Taiwan. I had a friend from Taiwan. That was the guy who bought me my airplane ticket. I was actually treating him. He had sciatica. And we were talking. I never charged him for the treatment, so he bought me a ticket to Taiwan and arranged for me to live with his brother-in-law, which was great, because I landed there. They picked me up at the airport. I was functionally illiterate when I got to Taiwan, and so it was pretty helpful to have somebody there.
Well, it's helpful when you're going to a foreign country and you don't know the language in particular, and the culture is a little bit different. Taiwan in those days they were still under military rule, weren't they?
Yeah, it was still what do they call that when?
Martial law.
Martial law. Yeah, we were still under martial law in those days. You couldn't go out into the mountains and that kind of stuff, because that was where, Mao had gotten he had taken all of his troops out into the mountains, and that's where and then came down and conquered China. So they didn't want that to happen again in Taiwan, and they wouldn't let you out in the mountains. You had to get a pass to go out into the mountains if you want to go for a hike or something. So it was a totally different place. It was and it wasn't developed. You've been to Taiwan, so you know that the Taida power station there, that was the tallest building in Taiwan. It was maybe, I don't know, 15 stories high or something like that. Yeah, everything it was all the Japanese built, houses. It was all that, and it was tough. It was tough living. The pollution was terrible. There wasn't air conditioning. It was really hot. It was, it wasn't a pleasant experience when I first got there. But Taiwan, of course, now is great. But in those days, it was a lot different.
Incredibly developed. When I got there, they were in the midst of building the tallest building in the world.
Yeah, that was 101. Yeah,
that was Taipei 101. Which and I get there, I'm like, what is with these people? They're building the tallest building in the world in an earthquake zone. Like, are these folks crazy?
Yeah, well, they did it.
They did it. Yeah, well, the Taiwanese have a heck of a spirit. So really, like back in the early day there, you were looking for something to do. something that might get you a couple of dates. You were just kind of knocking around and exploring stuff. You had no idea what you were getting into, did you?
No, and in those days when you talked about Chinese medicine, it was pretty much acupuncture. And I remember, discussing it with people, and they would go, "Oh no, herbs is way too hard for Westerners. They can't possibly do that. You should just study acupuncture. That's good enough for foreigners."
Good enough for Lao Wai.
Yeah, exactly. So I took that to heart, and that's why I really started to learn, acupuncture as best as I could in those days. But when I got to Taiwan, of course, there was an herb shop on every street, and kind of changed my mind about herbs. I said, no, this stuff's pretty interesting. I want to learn this.
So you get to Taiwan. Your Chinese is pretty horse, tiger.
That's for sure.
And how do you go about learning medicine when you can't speak the language?
Well, I could read. I could read fairly well even at that point. Because I had been translating Chinese medicine books for a couple of years already at that point.
Now, when did you start doing that?
As soon as I started to learn Chinese, I just picked up a Chinese medicine book and just went through it. Yeah.
Okay, so this is when you're in school. You're at NISA.
Yeah.
And you're studying Chinese medicine. So I guess I should learn some Chinese and I'll translate something.
Well, I didn't know what to do with the Chinese, and I didn't have any acupuncture books, so I got an herb. I found some herb books in Chinatown in Boston, and there I went. Yeah.
So you've been digging into the source material from the beginning.
Yeah, there was no choice. There were no books on. There was no books on Chinese herbology in 1980. 1 or 2, whenever that was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little more about grasping the wind, about the point names.
Yeah, I ended up writing that book about 6 years later. I had gone after I went to Taiwan and actually came back to America for a while. For about a year, I came back to America and taught and helped one of my teachers, which we haven't gotten into. One of my teachers in Taiwan wanted to come to America, and because he had a friend here and he was going to do some teaching, and he wanted me to translate. So I had to come back to America to do that for him. And so that was in 1986, maybe, something like that, 86 or 87. So when I came back, I was teaching and didn't have a lot else to do. I said, let's get back into that book on point names. And I think I found 1 or 2 Chinese sources. So then I could start doing it. But each point name, it would take me probably several weeks, of research. Because they were often you'd have to go look into, these obscure Taoist texts and things like that to figure them out. So I'd have to go and find these books, and it was, that was a chore. It would have been so much easier to do it later on when there was an internet. Yeah.
Yeah, there was no internet back then. I remember when I first got to Taiwan, I was schlepping around a Chinese dictionary. Because, you need it to figure stuff out. And then I got so lucky because within 6 months of being there, the dictionary was transferred to a little, at that time it was a Palm Pilot.
Right, I remember those. I
could carry a dictionary in a thing that was less than the size of a pack of cards. It was nothing short of a miracle. I'm thinking, how did people do this before? Well, you schlepp books.
Yeah, that was one of the thing. And the other thing, of course, is you had to know how to look up characters, not by their pinyin name or something like that. You had to be able to look them up by stroke order and all that kind of thing, by the radicals.
Yes, makes you learn your characters. That's for sure. It's actually a great way to learn Chinese, is learn to look things up in Chinese.
Sure, it was good. Yeah, I had the, I forget the name of the dictionary, but I was out of Harvard. Wade Giles, was that? I think it was a Wade Giles dictionary. But in any case, so every time I would look up a character, I would highlight it. And so I knew that I'd looked it up before. So you wouldn't believe how many times I would look up the same character and say, oops, I guess I already knew that one, huh?
I would actually, Andy Ellis, I would believe it. It's like, this one, I know I should know this one. How many times have I looked it up? I have no idea. I'm going to look it up again.
So anyway, that's the way it works. You throw mud at the wall and a little more sticks every time. And that's the way you learn Chinese, I think.
Yeah. So what's the importance of knowing the point name? I mean, in terms of actual practice, how's it helpful?
Well, I think it gives you the overall view. Oftentimes when we're learning Chinese medicine, the way I always approached it is I want to have the mindset of the people who did this medicine. I want to get into their mind space. So they were looking at the body as a geographical item, as a miniature world. And these point names were locations on the world. And so they had meaning, just like New York has meaning, and Chicago. I have no idea what Chicago actually means, but it's probably an Indian name or something. But they all have meanings. And if you want to get into the way that they understand the world, then you have to, then it really helps to know the geography.
Hadn't thought about it as a way of thinking about geography, but that makes sense.
Oh, sure, because the original, the idea of qi came from geomancy. It was a picture of a guy trying to find the flows of water below the surface of the earth, and that's so it's similar to what we do with qi, obviously. Yeah, so that's what the channel. If you look at the character for channels, that's where it comes from.
Oh, okay. So the character for channels is searching for water.
Yeah, they were looking for stuff underground. Water was essential to life, just as qi is. Yeah.
That's for sure. All right, so you go to Taiwan. Is that where you would say you learned the medicine?
Well, I think I got a good start from Dr. So. It was all in code. I couldn't really get it, a lot of it, because he was translating into what he thought was an English equivalence of things. And sometimes later on, you go, after you learn the Chinese character, you go, oh, I get it now. But when you first, he would say stuff like, the way he used the words hot and cold and everything like that was just all so foreign to me at the time. What is he talking about? And but I still, nonetheless, I got a good basis. It's a good basis in the real Chinese sense of the word, because in China, what they do when you're learning stuff, and you're well aware of this, is that you memorize a lot of stuff, and it makes no sense to you when you're memorizing it, and then later on, at some point, what they call in Chinese, you get the kai hua. That means the opening of the flower, and you'll be walking down the street and you go, oh, now I get it. And that I would have a number of those moments. As I was learning Chinese, I'd go, oh, that's what he was talking about. So I did get the good basis of Chinese medicine from Dr. So, but of course that was only acupuncture and in theory. But when I got to Taiwan, it was an entirely different thing. So I was very lucky. When I got to Taiwan, I had after about 6 or 8 months, my speaking and listening skills began to catch up with my reading skills. And in those days, we could even write Chinese, which I can't do anymore. Now I just pick out a character on the screen. But in those days, I actually used to be able to write them. And so in any case, I was very lucky because I met, two things happened. One is I wandered into this guy, Li Zhongyu's practice. And because people told me he likes foreigners and you should go in there and see what happens. So I went in there. It was pretty funny. So I go in there and we're talking, and he gets on the phone, he calls Nigel and says, Nigel, you got to get down here. I got another foreigner here. And so Nigel comes down, and Nigel actually kind of tested me. He said, what does this mean? What does this mean? Translate this. He'd give me these pull out a Chinese medicine book, and I could do it because that was all I could do. If he asked me to tell him about the weather in Chinese, I would have been in trouble. But as long as we were talking about Chinese medicine, I was good. So he said, oh, good, you can help us with our project. So they were working on fundamentals of Chinese medicine, him and Paul Zimwetsky, or he and Paul Zimwetsky, if we want to be grammatically correct. So anyway, so I started hanging out at the Dr. Lee's clinic, which was great. He's still there, Dr. Lee, he's still doing it. And that was one fortuitous thing that happened. And the fact that Nigel, accepted me into the group was obviously really important. And then this other guy, whose name I don't remember, introduced me to a practitioner in the middle of the island who had an herb shop. His name is Shu Fu Su. And he had an herb shop, and he was a Chinese medicine doctor. His father had been a Chinese medicine doctor. And he invited me to come down and live with him at his place if I would teach him English. And let's just say it's a good thing that I was better at learning Chinese medicine than he was at English, because I don't think he ever learned any English, but I learned a lot of Chinese medicine hanging out at his place there. So it was an ideal situation. I had the herb shop right on the first floor, with the kitchen, and then his family lived on the second floor, and I lived on the third floor. And it was just a great situation. During the day, Dr. Shu would see patients, and I'd sit around listening. They were mostly talking the local dialect. I had no idea what they were talking about, but eventually I started.
They were talking Taiwanese.
Yeah, Taiwanese. So I eventually learned quite a bit of Taiwanese, just at least listening level, so I could understand stuff. But anyway, I would fill all the herb formulas. I would keep the herb drawers filled. I would slice all of the huang qi, which was hong qi in those days. And I would slice the shou di and the sheng di, because it would come in these big things that looked like a turd. And we'd slice them. All kinds of stuff. I would do some powder. I would make pills, all that kind of stuff. All the dirty work I got to do. And then at night, though, I would study Chinese medicine, with Chinese medicine books, and go over the cases that Dr. Shu had treated during the day. And he would help me out as much as I wanted. He was right there, So it was an ideal situation. I couldn't ask for anything better. Yeah.
Extraordinary, really.
Yeah, very lucky. I mean, I appreciated it at the time. I said, "Wow, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe that I went to China, and I went to, in those cases that's what I consider China, and I got to do this, this stuff. And not only that, but we were working on fundamentals of Chinese medicine. And Nigel, is a genius, a linguistic genius, and I got to study with him. I got to understand the ins and outs of translation, and making a glossary and all that kind of stuff, and that I hadn't really thought about previously, and all the subtleties involved in translation. So and every weekend I would travel up to Taipei and meet with Paul and Nigel, and we would go over terminological choices. My role in that book was those two things. One was helping with the terminological choices we were making, and the other thing was I added in all the acupuncture. The original Chinese version of the book didn't have any acupuncture, and Paradigm Publications realized that a book on herbology in those days would sell about 6 copies, because nobody studied herbology. And if we didn't put acupuncture in there, Fundamentals of Chinese Medicine would have been a useless book. So I put the acupuncture points in there. Luckily, I had 2 acupuncture teachers in Taiwan at the time. And so I could ask their advice, because otherwise that book would be, it'd be pretty sad. Yeah, it would have been my opinion about what goes in there.
So I'm just trying to imagine this. You're off to school, you do a bit, Dr. So leaves, you land in Taiwan. You're in the midst of attempting to learn Chinese medicine. You meet Westerners who are in the midst of translating a book on Chinese medicine. You're living with people that are teaching it to you day by day. And by working on this book, you're also deeply learning the fundamentals, because you're taking it from Chinese into English as you're actually practicing medicine at the same time.
It's true. It was a very well-rounded education that I ended up getting. And further than that, actually, I would go with my teacher when he wanted to, get herbs for his herb shop, we would go to the various suppliers. And so I would go with him, and we'd go and we'd pick out, he'd say, "Oh, this is good." He'd smell the herb and he'd tell me what was good about it, what was bad about it. So I started to learn a lot about the herbs themselves, what was good quality and that kind of thing. He also used the concentrated granules, so I got to learn how to use those according to, the principles that people were doing in Taiwan.
Yeah. Now, how was he using them?
Well, what do you mean? He was using in his practice.
So I remember when I was there, I got really sick one time. A friend of ours, Catherine, took me to go see a Lao Zhongyi, who put together the weirdest formula. I mean, I remember looking at this formula and thinking, God, this guy is definitely past his pull date. If I wrote a formula like Dr. Zhang wrote, my teachers would say, go back and think some more. Because he put together like 3 or 4 different formulas and then modified it with a couple of herbs.
Uh-huh. Oh, you mean, so he took the granules, 3 different formulas, and then added in a few other herbs?
The granules, yes. Yeah. So is that how your teacher was doing it too, or was he doing it in a more traditional way?
Rarely, usually maybe two formulas, one or two formulas, and then modifying with single herbs was his technique. But boy, I've seen guys in America that there was this guy in Florida I used to study with, and he was from mainland China. He had never seen these granules before. I had no idea what they were, but he just sort of treated the formula as if they were single herbs. So he'd use like 5 and 6 formulas, put them together. So well, yeah, I want to supplement the qi. I'll put in Buzhong Ichi Tang. I think I should supplement the yin. I'll use the old Wei Di Huang one. So yeah, that was his approach. Yeah.
Which is kind of a Japanese approach, isn't it?
No, but Dr. Shubusu didn't do that. No, he was pretty conservative. Yeah, he was pretty much used mostly Jingfang. He used mostly classical formulas. He was still trying to pass the test in Taiwan. He never did pass it, but he was still taking the test every couple of years. And so he had memorized all of the Shanghan, and he had memorized the Benzao Beiyao, all the books that you had to memorize in those days in Taiwan if you wanted to take the exam, if you wanted to pass the exam. So he was pretty classically trained. Yeah.
And so you learn all this stuff. You come back to the United States. What happens after that?
I came back only briefly because my teacher wanted to, as I mentioned, he wanted to teach here for a while. So I came back for a while. Then we ended up going back to Taiwan in 1987. And so I was like 86 I left. And I couldn't have been 86 because in 86 I went to mainland China. Yeah, that's another story. So I was teaching English in Taipei, which is what all of us did. That's how you made money. And it was about 300 kwai an hour, 300 new Taiwan dollars an hour, and that worked pretty well. You could work about 10 hours a week, and you could pay your rent and you could eat. That was about it.
And study medicine.
Yeah, and study medicine, exactly. So we were doing that, and I was doing that, and then so in '86 I was doing one of those teachers, and one of my students came up to me after class and he said, I'm just here at this Bushiban. It was a Bushiban was where I was teaching. Bushiban means like an after-school, supplemental education program. And so I was teaching at one of those, and he said, I'm just here because I'm looking for a good English teacher. Why don't you come over to my company and teach? I'll pay you 800 kwai an hour. I said, okay, this sounds like a good deal. So it turned out he was the vice president of Wang Computer Company, which was a big computer company that had an office in Taipei. And he asked me, if I would teach there. So I did. I taught there for about a year. Then I had to go home. My mother was sick, and I had to come back to America to help out. And I did. And then he wrote me when I was here in America and said, back in those days, they had letters, and you put them in a mailbox, and then 2 weeks later, you'd actually get them. And then you'd write them back. And
they sent them on the Pony Express, right?
Right. So it was 1 month by the time, if he wrote something, it would be a month before he heard back from me because it would take 2 weeks each way to get back and forth. In any case, he invited me. He said that they were opening an office in Xiamen in China, mainland China. And would I like to come with him to mainland China to teach English to his, to the people in the Wang Computer Company? I said, well, if I can study Chinese medicine when I get there. He said, okay. So he paid for my ticket back to Taiwan. And then I took a boat to Hong Kong and got the visa. And then I hopped on a boat to Xiamen. There's a boat from Hong Kong. It's still, if you ever get a chance to do it, it's a wonderful trip. I recommend that you do that. Go from Hong Kong to Xiamen. It's just a beautiful trip. Anyway, you can go all the way to Shanghai on that same boat. And anyway, so on the boat, I was, and this information, by the way, is all in the book I wrote called the book I translated called The Clinical Experience of Dr. Shi Nengyun, because this is how I met Dr. Shi. As I was on that boat, and this guy comes up to me. I was reading a Chinese medicine book on acupuncture, and he comes up to me and he goes, "Wow, you can read a Chinese medicine book on acupuncture? This is amazing." And we started to talk, and it turned out that his father was Chen Yinglong, who had been the head of the acupuncture department in Xiamen. And as a side note, I'll mention that he was one of the first disciples of Cheng Dan-an, who also is who Dr. So had studied with, the same school. This is called the Cheng Dan-an, what they call it, the Chengjiang. It's called the Chengjiang Zhenjiu Shui something, Shui Pai. And so it was the school of the Chengdanan school of acupuncture. Anyway, so they're from the same school, it turned out. I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, so his father was Chen Yinglong, and Chen Yinglong was no longer practicing at the hospital, but his student was, and his student was Dr. Shi. And so this guy wrote me a letter, wrote me a little note of introduction to Dr. Shi. And so once I got settled in Xiamen, first thing I did was go over to the hospital and see if I could internship with Dr. Shi. And he was excited about it, but they had to get permission from Beijing. So that took a little while, and they didn't know what to charge me or how to do anything at all.
Right. What do we do with this foreigner?
And in those days, this is a long time ago, so they had separate foreigner money, and there was foreigner money and there was Chinese people money, and so the foreigners could only use the foreign money, and so there were special stores you could go into. So everybody wanted that money so they could go in there because you could buy stuff in those stores you couldn't buy elsewhere. In any case, they figured out that they would pay me that I had to pay them 90 yuan a month for to get this to study with Dr. Shi. So 90 yuan in those days was about $11 US. So I was paying about $11 a month to study with Dr. So in the morning with Dr. Shi, in the morning I'd study with him for like 3 hours. Then he would have his little communist meeting. After lunch they had to have their communist meeting. I don't know what went on there because I wasn't privy to those. And then after that meeting, Dr. Shi would sit down with me and we'd go over all the cases in the morning and any other questions I had. He was an amazingly patient individual, especially, my spoken Chinese at that time was probably a lot better than it was, originally, but still, I'm still a foreigner. Yeah.
Still a foreigner.
Anyway, so I went to mainland China in 86. And when I was there, I arranged that Nigel and I would come back to China in 88 and that we would bring a bunch of foreigners, that means Americans, and to Xiamen, and we would translate for them, and then Xiamen Hospital would make a lot of money. And so we did that. We arranged all that, and then in 1988, we went back to mainland China.
Andy, they don't sound like communists. They sound like capitalists. That's a very capitalist enterprise.
Well, we were in the special economic zone, yeah. Xiamen's was a special economic zone. Remember that's the way they did it originally when they wanted to change from communism toward capitalism. Deng Xiaoping thought that they would have these special economic zones. And
yes, hopefully they could contain the contagion, but that didn't work so well.
Well, God knows. I'm confused. Yeah. Anyway, so I don't know where we were there, but so there was this.
Well, you were studying with Dr. Shi because you met a guy on a boat.
Right, yeah.
Who was related to Dr. So through the schooling.
He wasn't related to Dr. So. He was related to Chen Yinglong. And Chen Yinglong was related to Dr. So in that they both studied with this from the Chengdanan school.
Now, was there anything special about that Chengdanan school? Or was it just, your basic acupuncture? Was there anything special about it?
Well, I think they did have a unique. His point locations were all based on the Zhenjiu Dacheng, which is I think we call it the complete book of acupuncture, which was a late Ming Dynasty text, I'm pretty sure. And so the point locations were a little different than what was being taught, in the modern acupuncture schools, because they were based more on anatomy at that point. Because the Essentials of Chinese Acupuncture and those books, those point locations were all based on Western anatomy. So, because they wanted to make it look good for the West, I think, or something. I don't know. They thought that the traditional location methods weren't specific enough. And so that was one aspect, was the point location. The needle techniques were very traditional in terms of supplementation and draining. He had very intricate methods of supplementation and draining at each point.
So can you give me an example of what you mean by traditional and intricate?
Well, all the stuff that you learn in school was kind of combined in what they called their midnight noon method. And it had to do with, so the idea is that you were taking, if you want to supplement, you're taking the qi from the outside of the body, the wei qi, and you're bringing it in to supplement the channel qi. So you insert the needle superficially, and then you go down, you have to get the qi and then you push it along the channel one direction or the other. So you can go, if you want to supplement, you go with the channel. If you want to drain, you go against the channel. The same thing goes with your needle manipulation, the way that you move your finger and thumb against the needle, if you're turning it one direction, you're going with the channel. If you're turning it another direction, you're going against the channel. So supplementation and draining was also used that way. And the idea is that, and then if you wanted to, there's thrusting and, what do they call that? Thrusting and pulling, or thrusting and whatever the opposite of thrusting is. So when you're going in, when you're inserting a needle and you use the emphasis on the in, then you're supplementing. When you on the emphasis is on pulling out, then you're draining. So you're pulling things out of the channel. So all of those things were combined, between the twirling and the twirling and the thrusting and the pulling and the with the channel against the channel, and then opening the hole or closing the hole when you're done. Either putting your thumb on the hole or not putting your thumb on the hole when you're done. Those were all considered to be very important aspects of the supplementation and draining techniques that were used. And getting the chi was also very important. So each point, and this was something I learned from Dr. So originally, each point had a feeling that was associated with it. When you put the needle in, if you didn't get that feeling, then you didn't get the point. And in both interpretations of that phrase. So anyway, yeah. So that's basically the technique that they used. So that was a unique aspect of it. And the other thing is they were a little bit influenced by Zhang Shichun. Now, because the school was just being formed just after Zhang Shichun had died. And Zhang Shichun is the guy who wrote the book about Chinese medicine. I never remember how they translate it, but with reference to the West or something like that. So his idea was to understand Western medicine and see how Chinese medicine and Western medicine could fit together, what we could benefit from, how Chinese medicine could benefit from Western medicine. So there was an aspect of that as well in their thinking.
Okay, so that was like the original book on integrative medicine.
I guess he didn't reject all Western medical thought. They especially took to heart the the anatomy, and some of the physiology that Western medicine had presented to them. And they said, well, how can this fit into Chinese medicine?
Now, at some point, you meander yourself back to the United States. This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account.
Yeah, I got back here in about 1990.
1990.
So most of the decade of the 80s, I was in Taiwan or mainland China. 1990, I came back here.
By 1990, Chinese medicine is kind of getting up ahead of steam here in the United States.
Yeah, we had just published Fundamentals of Chinese Medicine. It was received with a thud, and because we used a terminology that people weren't familiar with at the time, and it's funny because now I hear people using those terms all the time. I have to say, I find it very amusing. I'll hear somebody use a word and I go, wait a minute, I invented that word.
Why do you think it landed with a thud?
Oh, because we were using vacuity and repletion instead of deficiency and excess. We had things like depurative downbearing and other terms like that other people had really just mostly ignored. and they just didn't translate those things because they were too weird.
Well, they are weird. I mean, some of these ideas really are weird. I mean, even something as simple as, shi and shu, right? Deficiency, excess, repletion, deficient. I mean, one of the things that I've always been curious about, maybe you can throw a little light on this for me. I started studying this stuff in the mid-90s and didn't know any Chinese and was hoping that I could somehow get through a Chinese medicine education without having to learn much Chinese, just to show you the ignorance that I had. And then landed at a school where they made us study Chinese every single quarter that we were there. So much for trying to attempt to avoid your fate. But the thing that I was curious about back then was, look, I'm a Westerner. I'm trying to understand something that's very, very foreign. There's different people that will translate a concept in different ways. Maybe it would be helpful to try to understand what each of these different translators is looking at and saying. Maybe I'll get a little closer to what that Chinese actually is. But instead, it seems like we have these translation wars.
Well, it seems like those have calmed down. I don't feel that anymore. Now I can use any. I've worked with all the different publishers, so I've used all the different glossaries. I don't think it's a big deal so much anymore. First of all, they've kind of melded together. A lot of the terms now are the same, which is great. Deficiency and excess will remain different from repletion and vacuity. The thing to understand about translational terms is that none of them hit the exact spot. And it would be impossible because of the way that languages evolve. They evolve, each word has so many connotations and used in so many different ways that each word carries a number of meanings. And so if you try to just pick one of those words or one word that has a couple of those meanings, that's about the best you can do. And then from there, you're really, you're dependent on definition. People have to define the terms. That's why it's important to have terms. I think it's important for people to see when the same character is being used in Chinese. If you have different English terms for all those things, then it gets very confusing for them, and they're not getting an accurate picture. They're not getting the kind of feeling that the Chinese person is getting when they read the book. So that's something. But no, I think those have calmed down, which is great. I did a really an hour lecture on the difference on shu and sure and why we chose repletion and vacuity. But the truth is that none of those words that it really matters what the words are. It's important that people understand what those concepts are.
Yes, exactly. And different words can help. It's kind of like poetry. Poetry doesn't aim directly at anything. It kind of talks around something. Different terms, especially going from one language to another, talk around something. It's that something that we're aiming at.
Well, I remember having a long discussion. Nigel and I would have long discussions about this, deciding what we were going to do with repletion and vacuity, for example. And I remember that what I thought the best thing to do was just stick with sure and shu. But he didn't want to do that because he said that the foreigners would mess up sure and shu so badly that it really bothered him to hear people mispronounce things, and being a linguist. And so he just couldn't bear the fact of all these people trying to pronounce sure and shu. And so he said, no, we have to come up with words, and we did. And we wanted to actually we were deliberately vague and obscure in some of the words. And the idea was that, the people will have to look it up what it means. They'll have to try to figure out what the word means. That will be a better experience for them. If we give them a word, like if we say deficiency or excess, then they think it actually means deficiency and excess, which of course it does not. Those are deficiency and excess are decidedly quantitative terms, and shu and sure are decidedly qualitative terms. And so to confuse them like that, or to give is sometimes that's doing a disservice to the reader. You're making them think they understand something when they actually don't understand it at all, because you're being so specific. So it's sometimes good to be vague, and that's why we picked really weird words in some cases for certain concepts, which I don't know if that's a linguistic trick that other people use or not, or if that's something Nigel came up with, but it fit for going from Chinese to English.
Yeah, it's helpful to hear that. Certainly, before I learned some Chinese, I was looking to nail the terms down. So I would not have been a person to go, well, gosh, I'm not sure about that. Maybe I should investigate it more. I would have just looked at it more as that quantitative. I totally missed that nuance that it was qualitative. Maybe I should go look more. I mean, at this point, I get it. And I think often with our medicine anyway, it's often so qualitative. I mean, we have to stop and look and reconsider all the time anyway. It really is. But, more and more, I think especially in our modern world with evidence-based medicine and protocols and all that, I think folks are looking to nail it down. But it's hard to nail down Chinese medicine.
Yeah, I mean, it's an observation-based medicine, obviously. When you're observing things, there's an awful lot of factors that go into that, including the person observing the thing.
Yeah. Now, you ended up with a little herb company.
I didn't end up with that. Yeah, so let me see. Now we're skipping time here because we were in 1986, I think. Then we got to 88, and then I was in 90. So I actually went to Florida and had a practice for a few years.
What were you doing in Florida? Why Florida?
Doing acupuncture and herbs, and I taught. There was a school there I taught at the same time. I had a very busy practice, so seeing about 20 patients a day. I just walked right into it because Dan Neville, I don't know if you know Dan, but Dan had a very busy practice and it was overflowing, and he asked me would I come down and help, and so I did. So I immediately had all these patients. It was great, and so I stayed there for a couple of years and practiced. And it was, it was at the time of when HIV was just, I hate to use this word, blossoming. And so I got a lot of experience treating immune disorders, obviously, and all other kinds of things. It was an incredible experience. So I did that for a few years. Then moved back to American College of Traditional Chinese Medicine, which I believe no longer exists. They invited me to come and teach herbology at their school, and I thought that was great. And I decided to be a small fish in a large pond, as opposed to in Florida, I was a big fish in a small pond, and went there. And that was a very difficult time, I think, just financially, because it was so expensive to live in the Bay Area, and acupuncture schools didn't pay a lot of money, and so.
And you didn't have a full practice right off the bat.
Well, in Florida, I had a full practice. In California, I wasn't licensed.
In Florida, you did, but not in San Francisco.
Yeah.
You weren't licensed.
Yeah, because they had a separate license in Florida at the time. I mean, in California at the time. And there was no way I was going to do that again. So I just said, okay, well, I'll just do herbs, because you could still do herbs. And so I just did herbs. Yeah. And so my wife, Shenjing, who had nothing to do because my mother-in-law was taking care of the kids, said, what am I going to do? I said, I don't know. Why don't we just start an herb shop? So we started an herb shop. We borrowed $3,000 from some friends and started Springwind Herbs. It was just an herb shop, for my patients and for my students' patients and for my students. And
give your wife something to do.
Right, yeah. She had studied acupuncture and she knew a lot about herbs, so she was in a good position to help out with that. Yeah, so we did that, and then it just grew out of control. I had no business experience and no idea how to run a business or anything like that, and had no interest actually in running a business because Chinese medicine was my thing, and especially herbs.
Okay, so here you are. You're not interested in business. You don't know how to run a business. You're running a business.
That's what happens. That's what happens when you have a family and you have to learn, you have to support them, and you're trying to be true to the medicine at the same time. It was I was in the perfect position to do it because I had studied all this herbs. I had been to herb suppliers. I had learned all about herbs in Taiwan. I had been in mainland China. I'd seen the herbs they use there. I'd done all kinds of experiences that made me the perfect person, I guess, to come to America and say, hey, you guys are using the wrong herbs. So we did. We found out, that they were using the wrong herbs in a lot of cases.
So wrong herbs. Here you are, this Lao Wai who learned about his herbs in Taiwan. You're opening up an herb shop, just help to support the family, keep the wife busy, help your friends out with some herbs, and you're finding some of the herbs are wrong. What were you finding?
Well, my awareness of this situation occurred before that because I had studied in Taiwan and mainland China. And I noticed that a lot of the herbs in mainland China were different from the ones that were, called the same name, but looked quite different from the ones in Taiwan. I tried to figure out what was going on with that situation. So I started to, whenever I would go to Hong Kong, I tried to buy, there was some good bookstores in Hong Kong, and I tried to buy some books on herb identification. And luckily, right around that time, people were writing those books because they were discovering that in mainland China, a lot of the herbs at different markets were sold by the same name, but were quite different. And this is the big divide, of course, is the southern herbs and the northern herbs. And so there were herbs that were being used in the north that were quite different from the ones being used in the south. So the Chinese government got into the act and started picking which herbs would be the official herb for under that pinyin name, under that Chinese name. So, for example, ban sha should be Pinellia, and it shouldn't be Typhonium. And yet in the south, the people were using Typhonium for ban sha, and in the north they were using Pinellia. In Taiwan, they were also using the southern version, and in America, they were also using the southern version, so they were using the Typhoniums. And the reason for that is that almost all the herbs that were exported both to Taiwan and mainland China all came out of the south. They all came out of Hong Kong because there was not trade directly between China and other countries at that time. And so everything went through Hong Kong, and what they were used to using in Hong Kong is what became common in the West. And to some extent also in Taiwan, although there were differences between Taiwan and Hong Kong also. So sometimes there'd be 3 or 4 different herbs that were used for the same item. So it got to be quite complex to try to figure it all out. But luckily, like I said, there were books being published around that time. So I had an advantage. But when I got back to America, I noticed that, yes, there was, Baihua Shisha Cao, Shengma, Ban Sha. These are the ones that come to mind right away. They were all different than what the Chinese Materia Medica said they should be, because they were all the southern herbs. Then when you get to less common herbs, like things like Baijiang Cao and stuff like that, then you start to find out that, yeah, there's also a difference between the south and the north in that instance.
Now, how do you suppose the Chinese had been dealing with this? I suspect they've been dealing with it for a long time, the differences between the north and the south.
I don't know. You never read about it. You never heard about it. Yeah, so it was really funny because the Banlan gun, there's a southern Banlan gun and there's a northern Banlan gun. The southern one is called Strobilanthes, I think, and the northern one is called Isatis. And they would run, tests, and they say, oh, this Banlan gun has antiviral properties. And I'm beginning to think, well, okay, that's great. Which Banlan gun has antiviral properties? Yeah. So I still to this day don't know what they used in those tests when they were doing those, when they found that out, or maybe they both have it. I don't know, but yeah.
And that's how Banlan gun got associated with being antiviral?
Oh, because they did those tests, sure.
Because they did those tests, but we don't know which one they did.
I don't know which herb they were using, because they didn't, in those days, they didn't put the Latin names or anything like that. They just said Banlan gun,
And what was so were they using the southern Ban Sha when you were learning from your teacher in central Taiwan?
In Taiwan, they only used the southern. I never saw the northern Ban. I never saw that stuff.
How would you say their function is different?
Yeah, their function is different, slightly. They're both good for, for phlegm in the lungs. But for the down-bearing the stomach qi, you really need to have the Pinellia, according to what everyone says.
And has that been your experience as well?
Yeah. So in Puzhong Ichi Tang, so in certain I was thinking of the Shengma for that one because they used the wrong Shengma for that. Yeah, they used to use the southern Shengma, which is incorrect. Yeah. So what you had to get was this stuff called if you wanted the real Shengma, you had to order Guilian Shengma, which is great. It's the ghost face Shengma, because when you look at the root itself, it looks like this monster. And so anyway, yeah. So that Shengma was used in the south because it was used for smallpox, and to outthrust the rash. And it was effective for that. In regular Shengma, the northern Simicifuga was also used for that. And so because they were both used for the same thing, they both became called Shengma. But in terms of uplifting qi, and this is where I was thinking of Buzhong Ichi Tang, in terms of uplifting qi, you have to have the Simasifuga because the other one doesn't do that. The southern variety.
They both out thrust, but only one will raise the qi.
Exactly. So that was not uncommon. A local herb that was used for the same disorder might get the same name as another herb. Yeah.
Makes it hard to learn herbal medicine, doesn't it?
That certainly complicated matters. Yeah. But anyway, when I got back to the United States, when we opened Spring Wind, that was one of the first things we did was try to educate people about what was the correct species. That situation seems to be in hand at this point. And so, so it's not a big issue now, but I still spot incorrect species every now and then. Yeah. And I spotted it, in the companies that were making the granules and that kind of stuff. I always asked them for, I want to make sure that they're using the correct species. And we would discover that they were using the wrong thing now and again. Yeah. So that was one thing. And then later on, Springwind became famous for testing for pesticides because we were the first company to do that. We did it in the mid-90s, I'm sorry, not mid-80s. Mid-90s, we started testing for pesticides. And the reason for that was that we had asked about pesticides, and all of our suppliers had said, oh, no, you don't have to worry about pesticides. The people in China are too poor. They can't afford pesticides. I hadn't been out into the countryside, even though I had lived in China. I hadn't really been to the countryside where they grew the herbs that much. And so I took a couple of trips out into the Netherlands there. Is that the Netherlands? And discovered that every single village I went in had these big signs that said "No Meow, No Meow." You could buy No Meow is pesticides, and you can buy it. You could buy it at every single little village. And then I'd go drive by these fields, and people would be out there spraying everything with pesticides. They're not wearing any protective gear or anything. They're just out there spraying. And so I said, "Oh no, this is a little out of control. We got to start testing for pesticides." So that we started that in the mid 90s. Yeah.
It's curious, Andy. It sounds to me like you have just kind of wandered your way through a career in Chinese medicine.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Yeah, it was whatever was needed. I tried to do that. Because in bringing Chinese medicine to America, I think it's really important that we have the correct herbs. It's really important that we don't have pesticides in the herbs, or at least that. And that's not really even the point. The point is that people should know if there's pesticides in their herbs, and then they can make a decision if they want them or not. So, yeah, it was just, books need to be translated. I come across a book, you know how this is. You're in a bookstore in Taiwan, you go, oh man, this is amazing. I can't believe this stuff is written right here. I can just see, this is like having a teacher right here in my hands. And why shouldn't this be available to other people? And so you want to make it available to other people. And that's what so, whatever needed to be done.
I mean, so many different ideas, so many. Could you have imagined, back when you were, let's just say first back in the United States, early 90s, what was your sense of where the profession was headed at that point?
Well, that's a good question. I think I had no idea where it would go, or, even, in the 80s when I was studying, we were fundamentals of Chinese medicine, we were fundamentals of Chinese acupuncture. We did Grasping the Wind. I did a few other books. I did Dr. Scher's book. I did a few other books. Even at that time, I had no idea who the readership was, really. Trying to write for people. I'm trying to be a step ahead of them. You know what I'm trying to say? I don't want to write to what they already know. I want to write to what they don't know. And we want to do it in a fashion that's representing what we think Chinese medicine is. At that time.
Well, it sounded like you were following your own curiosity as well. That there's certain fundamentals that maybe you had, and then you read a book and you go, "Oh, this is amazing. This is new. People should know about this."
Sure. Yeah. That's exactly true. When I think you were, I don't know if you were still in Taiwan when I found Dr. Yu Guozhen's books, and he wrote a couple of books, and those, when I read that, I said, "Boy, this is something Westerners really need to know about. This is a really accurate," because this reflected the way that all the people I knew in China that I knew and respected in China. This is the way they did Chinese medicine. The way that he was doing it is based on classical literature, but they didn't ignore the modern world at the same time, and it was all clinically based. And those were that was the way I had learned Chinese medicine. I said, this has to be available to people. Yeah.
Those books are particularly unique and delightful because it's not just hearing from the doctor, but there's these discussions of other doctors that are also in the book. So you get to hear different voices and questions and perspectives. And like Chinese medicine has been for so long, it's a dialogue, it's an inquiry, it's a conversation, it's an ongoing investigation, really. And those books nail it, which makes them fun to read.
Right. And in another sense, they're that conversation. You're talking about a conversation in time, but those books are also a conversation through time. In other words, it's the transmission of Chinese medicine, not just horizontally, but vertically, going through time. So here's what my teacher did. Here's how I changed it. Here's what you might try. Here's the area that still needs investigation. That kind of stuff. That's how Chinese medicine has grown through the ages. It's taken a few wrong turns here and there, but nonetheless, I think it's all in all, Chinese medicine has grown. There's an awful lot of information out there now.
A lot of information. So back when you were first starting, of course, there was hardly any information. I mean, you had to wander yourself over to Taiwan to learn something. What would you say the challenges are now in front of us? There's plenty of information. We actually have a profession. There's licensure. People know what acupuncture is, or at least they've heard of it. They might think they know what it is. I'm still trying to figure out what it is myself. What would you say our current, challenges and opportunities are for the profession?
That's a good question. I'm probably not a great person to ask those things because I'm not that tuned into what is going on in my own little shell. I do teach classes now and then, so I get to talk to some practitioners. But I'm not part of the, I don't teach at any schools right now and that kind of thing. So I'm not quite sure. And I'm not also that educated in where the profession is going in terms of integration with Western medicine, all that kind of thing as well. So the politics of it, I'm not that aware of. But I think that in terms of advice for people who are studying Chinese medicine, and what they should do, given this large amount of information that's available and all the different schools that have now come to light, and you have so many choices. I would recommend what Dr. Scher told me, which was that you should first get a very good education in one particular school of Chinese medicine, and then once you have your roots firmly planted, then you go reaching for the sky after that. Then you start to learn you want to learn other things, that's fine. But get yourself grounded first in at least one discipline, and then go from there. So that would be my advice, because otherwise you're just going to get confused. If you do a little of this and a little of that, all this window shopping, then I think that that won't help you in your practice. What will help you is always having a really good basis to come back to. Yeah.
Some kind of stable foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And the classics can do that for you, because that's where everything comes from. So learning as much as you can about the classics is certainly a good idea. I don't believe in just sticking to the classics. That was 2,000 years ago. Things are a little different. And I like the eclectic approach, but I think that you have to have a very good foundation.
That makes sense to me. I have found over time stabilizing a certain set of, I'm going to say, clinical skills. It gives me something to work with. I can always fall back on it, for one, but it also helps me to understand anything else that I might be inquiring after. Right? There's something about having that stability of something that seems reliable in clinic that I can keep coming back to.
Yeah. Which road you decide to take, that depends a little bit on you yourself, because remember that not only is your knowledge of the medicine developing as you go through the years, you're developing and changing as you go through the years. So what path you're going to pick is really is also dependent on your personality, your background, your genes, or whatever else it might be. But so it's those are individual choices. But the pattern remains the same, in that if you have a good foundation, then that will actually help you to choose which of those things you're going to, and then and also you're going to study, and then also it gives you, having that foundation gives you the strength and the confidence to try different things. That's my advice for practitioners.
That sounds like reliable counsel.
Well, let me know.
I think that's something that all of my teachers that I've respected have said. Like, well, try that. Let me know how that goes. Like, take notes. Keep in touch.
Well, Michael, we didn't get very far. We've gone over an hour already, and I haven't even touched on so many things that I would have loved to share. Maybe we'll have to do another one at some point.
What else would you like to share before we wind it down?
No, we only got up to like 1990 something, and now it's 2020 something. So there was a lot of stuff that happened after that, and that probably would have led us to some interesting conversations.
But this is the way our medicine works, isn't it? You enter, you have an interaction with a patient, you do something, they have an experience, they come back and tell you about it. You do something else. Next thing comes along. It's a very meandering kind of medicine, at least as I've practiced it, and maybe because I'm a meandering person as well. And I think so often the way that we practice is less a reflection of the medicine and perhaps more a reflection of who we are with the medicine.
True. I think that some of my urgency is that, of course, I'm getting older. And, I had this very unique experience. I've studied with very famous doctors in China, and some not so famous doctors that were also great. And I've learned all kinds of things that I'd love to pass on, and I teach classes and try to pass that on as much as I can. And so you begin to have this kind of urgency that, oh gosh, I didn't say this, I forgot to tell them this, I forgot, that kind of thing. Because I'm not going to be here for them to ask, at some point.
Do you have another book that you're thinking about that might have some of this in it?
I think I'm done with books. I'm not sure. I keep saying that because, I've done so many books, and they're a lot of work. Yeah, there's a few books I'd still like to finish up, books that I have written but never published. Those are things that I probably would like to finish up before I head off to another world. But God knows. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
Well, Andy, Ellis, thanks for all you've done for the profession.
Yeah, great. Thanks for all the profession has done for me. It was a mutual thing. Yeah.
It really is, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You probably had no idea when you were thinking about impressing young women with being an acupuncturist that you would actually help to build some of the foundational aspects of what many of us have been able to stand on in terms of our learning and practice.
Well, that's really nice to hear. I hope that that's the truth, because I don't think about that stuff very much. I do think about, how much Chinese medicine has helped me in my life. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't even be alive now if I didn't know Chinese medicine. And I say that in all earnestness. and then all the other people that I've been able to help just by knowing Chinese medicine. So that's the kind of stuff I think about when I think of Chinese medicine. I don't really think about the books much. Once I write a book, I never look at it again. It's I don't even have most of them. It's just like that was something that had to be done. I did it, and it's kind of like no, I won't use a really terrible metaphor.
Well, kind of stepping stones, really, right?
I guess Yeah, I don't. So I don't think about the books very often. So, and then people every once in a while remind me, like, oh yeah, I did spend 10 years doing that, didn't I? So yeah, it's good to like when we were doing formulas and strategies when we did the second edition, I spent 10 years on that book and a lot of research. That's not it wasn't just like looking at some Chinese book and translate it into there. I did tons and tons of research for every formula that I added to that book.
Well, and you were part of a team in that effort.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. Working with Dan Bensky was the greatest. Yeah. We'd have these conversations that I'd go, I can't believe I'm having this conversation. We're talking about just really obscure and kind of and minutia of Chinese medicine, but it was really fun.
It's what you get for being kind of geeky, huh?
Yeah, that's what happened. You can't help it. Once you start getting into Chinese medicine, once you start looking at classical literature and trying to figure out, well, what did they mean? What were they talking about?
I think a lot of us have had that experience of what the hell are they talking about? What does this mean?
Yeah.
And those answers can sometimes take a long, long time and not be anything like you thought they'd be.
Sure, and a lot of times it's that Kai Hua experience that I was telling you before. You just all of a sudden you come across something in another book and you go, oh, now I get what he meant back when I read that guy.
这样子. Yeah. All right, Andy. Thank you for your time, and let's go have dumplings sometime soon.
Sounds good. I'll meet you in Gongguan.
Gongguan, 太好了.
All right. All right. Take care, Michael.
When I first thought of going to China to study for a spell a few years after graduating from Oriental Medicine School and shortly after a divorce, I ran into Andy at a conference and asked him about some places to study in China. His response? How long do you plan to go for? I had thought maybe 6 months. It seemed like a nice round number and more than a tourist amount of time. His recommendation? Go to Taiwan first and learn some Chinese, and then, after 6 to 9 months, I could make my way to the mainland and study Chinese medicine in Chinese. It was the oddest thing. I didn't really make a decision. I just knew in that moment that's what I was going to do. A year and a half later, I'm still in Taiwan, working on my Chinese. I'm most assuredly not the sharpest tool in the language shed. At the end of each study quarter, I drop back a few chapters in the book instead of moving forward with my classmates because I needed the review. I suspect my persistence came from finding a real delight in inhabiting the world of a foreign language and culture, and much of what seemed odd about Chinese medicine thinking is simply common sense when you're thinking in Chinese. That 6 months, it stretched into years. What I thought in the beginning was a detour, it turned out to be a kind of golden path. And I found out, as something Andy said to me as well, it never hurts to learn a bit more about something that you're interested in. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.